Howdy folks, Super Koopa here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we need family sitcoms again. I believe we need family sitcoms again. Why do I think this? Well, I've been going back and watching a ton of them. I've been watching Family Matters. I've really been watching Home Improvement primarily. I watched a little bit of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which you can argue whether or not that's family or not. But it's definitely more family-oriented than you would think, despite some of the undertone themes. It's more magical than actual witchcraft, so it's not inherently evil for those who are worried about it on the faith side of things. I know as a Christian, a lot of people might go, wait a minute, why is that good? I'm like, well, just watch it. It's not inherently evil. It's very fantasy. It's more Merlonian magic than it is actual Wicca. So I think it's fine. Maybe you disagree. Maybe that's an exception of yours. Okay, fair enough. But that's only one example. Boy Meets World is more family-oriented, even though kind of transitions towards the end towards just focusing on the kids while they're in college, but they're getting ready to start their own families. And in the beginning, you see them being raised with family values. Family Matters, I mentioned, is probably one of the pinnacle of family sitcoms and extended family. It is brilliant in terms of how it portrays the family. It's a very honest and truthful portrayal of a family. It may not be 100% accurate to all of its elements, but it is a beloved family sitcom. It is still talked about to this day. Urkel is still quoted. People still talk about their favorite episodes, and it's still a nice topic of conversation. So what happened? Where did all the family sitcoms go? Well, in the late 90s, they started to peter out and lose steam because blocks like TGIF became so oversaturated, and there were a lot of sitcoms that failed. I never really realized this, but there are a lot of failed sitcoms that tried to air on TGIF, and they barely got beyond a season or an episode. Some barely even got beyond a pitch meeting. It was the popular thing to do, so everybody and their grandma was pitching sitcom after sitcom after sitcom to network after network after network. And then the ones that were successful weren't family sitcoms. You had ones like Friends and Wings and Cheers and Frasier, which came out of that, and Becker and Everybody Loves Raymond and Seinfeld, legendary Seinfeld. Everybody Loves Raymond is a little bit more family-oriented from what I can tell, at least in some ways, but Seinfeld is mostly about bachelors and bachelorettes, So eventually it became, we're not going to focus on families, we're going to focus on single people who may become families. We're going to showcase that aspect of life, so everything became that. And the family aspect of sitcoms, from what I can tell and what I remember growing up, is they ended up on the Disney Channel. The Disney Channel took the family sitcom format, and they tried to keep replicating it over and over and over again and putting different spins on it. Like you had That's So Raven, which was more of a traditional family, but the gimmick was that she was psychic. You had Even Stevens, which was more of a traditional family, but everybody was kind of wacky with their own personality and traits and situations they would get into. You had Lizzie McGuire, who was the fixture of a teenage girl in a family of four, and the different situations with the dynamics that arose with that, but she was the primary focus, so the perspective was from the teenage girl member of the family. And then you had Hannah Montana later on, which was the focus of somebody who was living a regular life and the life of a pop star, and it was a secret identity sort of a thing. At the time, it was kind of revolutionary in some ways, but kind of not. I don't know. I didn't hate the show. I thought early on it was pretty decent. Then you had Wizards of Waverly Place, where they were all wizards, but it was still a central core family. Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, they didn't have a father, but they had a mother, and they were living in a hotel. That was a gimmick, and then later a cruise ship, which was even more of a gimmick, and sort of worked, and then it sort of didn't. And then just on and on and on. You get into the more modern ones like Jessie, and I don't even know after that because I just stopped watching. But eventually that formula stopped working over there too. As far as I can tell, they don't have any family sitcoms because they wore it out. But we need modern ones in the traditional style where the base focal point is that it's a family. You could take any member of the family and make them the focal point. You can do the mom, you can do the dad, you can do the little sister, you can do the infant. If you wanted to. I think Disney tried to do that with, what was it, Good Luck Charlie? But we need them spread across networks now, and they're nowhere to be found. If they do new sitcoms, they're usually based on just special groups of people or special individuals, and they don't focus on family and togetherness. They promote hyper-individualism. And that's part of the problem with Hollywood and with our culture is we promote this hyper individualism. It's fine if you want to live single, but everybody needs a family. Everybody needs a core family to be able to rally around, one that they both love and occasionally disagree with and argue with, but ultimately come together for the things that matter. Everybody needs a family, but Hollywood is not pushing the family anymore. They don't feel like that's profitable, even though that's what America needs and wants. We want more family-oriented stuff. We need more family-oriented stuff. Doesn't mean we can't have other stuff, but we're neglecting this that used to bring in the money. They say, well, it doesn't bring in as much money anymore. People just don't want it. No, people do want it. When it's done right, they don't bother to try to do it right and bring in people who will be willing to make it right. They just do whatever they want. And so as a result, you've got an entire genre that's just sitting on a shelf doing nothing. I've often suggested that ABC bring back traditional TGIF, but the last time they tried to reboot it, it wasn't even with family sitcoms. It was one family sitcom with a gimmick, one based on some comedian's life. I think it was some sort of Asian comedian that I hadn't heard of, but they were shows that I had never even heard of, and that one was more successful. It ran for a couple seasons, but it couldn't sustain the TGIF block. They need a group of family sitcoms that don't rely around gimmicks. That's what I struggled with Disney sitcoms, that everything had to be a gimmick. Wizards of Waverly Place, they were all wizards. That's So Raven, she was psychic. They still centered around family, which is where the heart came from, but the gimmick was the sole focus, and it created just this predictable, almost every situation was predictable because of the gimmicks surrounding it. And I was not a fan of that. And then Hannah Montana, the whole rock star thing, that was another gimmick. Because they felt like, just being in a family and getting into family situations, people have seen that. It's like, well, yeah, and they like it. They want to see more of it. They want to see it with different characters. They want to see how different characters handle in different situations. You've got to create a diverse amount of situations that people can get into that are realistic, at least to a believable degree. You have to have believable responses to a situation. For instance, let's take a family of 4. Let's take the middle son. He's got an older sister and 2 parents. Well, he's struggling in school. He's being bullied in school. How does he deal with his bullies? He chooses not to tell anybody about it. But you can see it in his mood. You can see when he comes home. He's usually a cheerful kid, but ultimately he ends up struggling because kids are quite literally picking on him and in some cases physically beating the tar out of him. But he's quiet about it. And so it gets discovered, whether through the sister or one of the parents, and they go, why didn't you tell us? Let's say the conversation is with mom and dad. And mom goes, why didn't you tell us? And he goes, well, I was embarrassed and I was ashamed that this was happening to me. And the parents go, well, it's okay. Everybody deals with this, And the parents offer solutions. The dad says, well, why don't you go to the teachers? And he says, I don't want to go to the teachers because then I'm going to have to deal with more bullying. And the mom says, well, why don't you learn to stand up for yourself? Or either of the parents could say either things. It doesn't really particularly matter. But one of them goes, well, why don't you learn to stand up for yourself? And he goes, well, how? And they say, well, either you fight. If it comes into a physical fight, you fight back. Or you stand up for yourself. You say, I'm not this thing you're calling me. I don't appreciate being called this thing. You stand up. You don't exude weakness. You stand firm. You learn to be a young man and to take responsibility and to stand up to people who are just putting you down because you're perceived as a weak, easy target. When you offer those multiple solutions, that's something different, as opposed to just saying, we'll go to the teacher and everything's fine. I've seen sitcoms do that, where kids are bullied and they're like, we'll go to the teachers and this will get solved. Well, realistically, that's not always the case. Sometimes you go to the teachers and the kids make it worse when the teachers are out of sight. So offering these multiple solutions is more realistic to families in America. That's what I mean. You don't need the kid to have some sort of superpowers to where he can start throwing his bullies out the window. You don't need him to have magic powers to where he can turn them all into frogs. He just needs a realistic way to deal with it. Maybe he has multiple things he tries, and then eventually one is a solution. I've seen some shows do that. That's a timeless story. As opposed to and people say, why don't we just teach kids not to bully? Well, there could be a storyline that's explored. I'm not a fan of that because I don't think it works, but it's a storyline that could be explored, and you don't need a gimmick to do it. You just need a realistic situation to put that family member in and get the other family members involved. Again, it's a situational comedy, and make it comedic, you know? Make the parents' responses comedic. Make the kids' responses often comedic. But then bring it back down to earth to the realistic feelings of how that kid feels about being bullied. And then offer realistic solutions to that. You know, that's how I would do it if I was to write a sitcom, honestly. That's one situation of an episode. Let me think of another one I could do. Okay, so the family I said was mom and dad, older sister, younger brother. The older sister is dealing with the fact that she's not popular. I mean, this was when we saw all throughout the 80s and 90s. She's not popular. She's picked on by the popular kids. She's not bullied like the little brother, but they make fun of her. They make fun of her clothes. They make fun of her style, and it's getting to her. And she's got a best friend or two who's like, yeah, don't worry about them. But then she's like, I want to be popular. I want to buy the popular clothes. Well, mom and dad say no because they can't afford it. So she decides to go and maybe try and steal some clothes. Okay, now you've introduced a moral dilemma here. You've introduced a moral situation where she has to decide, is popularity worth breaking the law over? And again, this isn't new. This is a very original concept. But the way the parents deal with her getting caught and the way that people deal with her getting caught and the advice they give her could be the factor that draws people in. Let's say that she gets caught stealing some shoes. You know, there's these popular shoes, but she can't afford them because they're like $150, $200. And it's from a place that they like to go. They know the clerks. They know everything. Well, at first the parents are upset, but they immediately go to, why are you placing value in being popular? You've got so many people around you. You've got your friends. You've got us. Why do you need the validation of these strangers? You can make your own fashion. If they're going to make fun of you, then the heck with them. It doesn't matter what they think. They've got their own view of the world. You've got your own view of the world. Don't let them drag you down based on this. And then they go back to the store and apologize to the clerks and make things right. They give the stuff back and everything's good and a lesson is learned at the end. The kid takes the lesson to heart and she goes on to ignore the bullying. Like I said, it's not the most original concept, but stuff like that draws audiences in. I'll do one more scenario I can think of for a new sitcom. All right? So it's the mother and father. Things are getting expensive in our day and age. Let me just take a drink of my soda here. Voice is starting to wear out. All right, so things are getting expensive in the modern age. Everybody can relate with that. So they've both got ambitions. They want to take vacations. The mom wants to take an expensive vacation to Disney World because she went to Disney World when she was a kid. The dad wants to take a cheaper vacation to somewhere in the area that he's more familiar with. And so they're talking about this and discussing this, and they end up arguing about it. Well, eventually, mom decides that she's going to book the vacation. They've got money for both, but they're going to book the vacation to Disney World without the father's permission and without discussing it. They just argued about it. She gets angry and decides to do that. And she surprises him with it all at dinner. The kids are excited. Dad is beside himself. How could you do this? How could you book this vacation? And then the kids suddenly, their expressions go from happy to disappointed because they see the disappointment in their father. And the mother is confused. The mother's like, well, I thought the whole goal of this was just to do something to have fun. And I didn't want us to have to worry about the finances. But the dad said, the whole reason we are having this discussion was because the finances are vital. We want the kids to be able to have money to do other things that they want to do. And you just robbed them of that out of your own selfish ambition. And he gets up and storms off. And the kids go, is dad going to be all right? And mom goes, I don't know. So the mom goes to consult with her mother, which is very typical. Her mother's very, very wise, very moral, older woman. And she goes, Mom, you know, I did something that my husband is mad at me for. You know, I booked a vacation. We were arguing about the prices of the vacation. The kids were all excited because we were going to go to Disney World. It was going to be great, but it was more expensive than what he wanted to do. And so eventually I just told him he was worrying too much about the finances, and I went ahead and booked it because I felt like I needed to do what was best for the family. And the mother goes, well, did you ever consider that if your husband had a point or not? And she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, did you ever consider that his point of view wasn't that he didn't want to have fun, but that he just wanted to have fun, not at the expense of being able to afford these other things that you need or that the kids want? You know, he was thinking about the broader picture, whereas you were only thinking about having fun, and you did that at the expense of your family. He was being more considerate, and he was trying to convince you that you both need to be more considerate, but you only did what you wanted to do. You were very selfish at the moment. And the mother at first kind of resists it, but then she goes to say, you know what? At the end of the day, you're right, Mom. I wasn't right. And she goes home, and the next night for dinner, she just says, I want to apologize. I canceled the vacation, we didn't put a deposit or anything down, so I just went ahead and got the preliminary stuff going, but I can easily pull that back, and we'll do what your father's idea was. And then the father comes back and says, I found another solution that's more similar to this. Instead of going to this place, we'll go to somewhere that's more similar to Disney World, but more affordable. And that way we can still have money left over to do whatever we need to do for the rest of the month/year. And then everybody's happy, and it's got a wonderful conclusion. It sounds very, it sounds very traditional and done before. But the way that I presented that to you, if you really think about it and break it down, it's a good storyline. The kids have an example of mom and dad not always getting along, but coming to the conclusion that they both want the same goal and eventually coming to a compromise that works for everybody and learning to work together. Because you won't automatically just work together in relationships. Sometimes you're going to have your ideas on how to do things, and they're going to have their ideas on how to do things. But you have to be willing to come together for the sake of the family. And that's where the core of the family is at. It's a really, really good formula for a sitcom. But that whole thing that I just talked about, they don't do stuff like that anymore. And if they do, it's rare. And you have to go back to older stuff to find storylines like that, like Home Improvement. Or Home Improvement was very good because Tim and Jill fought all the time in that show. Because Tim struggled with being largely incompetent at being this, gruff handyman, and Jill had her more egalitarian views of the world, and they struggled to come together. But they both had to be humble to admit when they were wrong. When it came to raising the kids, when it came to making decisions. But ultimately, and then we got to see how, as the kids grew, how they dealt with different situations. When they went from kids to being more adult age, I think they went to the end of high school. And we got to see them learn from their parents and make the same mistakes as their parents and learn from their parents how to make the right choices. And they had Wilson to consult with. Wilson was very wise, very patient, very kind. He was almost a perfect neighbor. I wish I had a Wilson, honestly. And that's why I want to try to be a Wilson in whatever living situation I end up in the future. And even to our regular neighbors, I'd like to try to be a Wilson. Not that I'm all knowing or anything, but just being an ear to listen to and try to give good general advice. There's not a lot of neighborly stuff like that. But all of these things I'm talking about are being ignored by Hollywood. When they were once the pinnacle. And people still relate with that. It still tugs on their heartstrings. So I don't understand why ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, all of the networks, all of the streaming services, they just seem to be ignoring this. Netflix is trying with some of their sitcoms, but again, like ABC, the last sitcom I saw was something about dating ghosts. It's just gimmicky, tired, and stupid. There's no real morals to be learned from that. It's all based around the gimmicks. They're like, oh yeah, but there's all the morality of dating and all this other stuff. But it's with ghosts. It's not real. Something with a family is real. It's tangible. You can get behind it. You can show it to your kids. Your kids can learn valuable lessons. You can't do that with a stupid gimmick with a bunch of single people. There's lessons to be learned, but not like the lessons of raising a family. My generation is raising families for the first time, and they need a blueprint to follow. Obviously, as a Christian, I think they should have a biblical blueprint first, but they also need society to reflect what being a good family is like, and they're not seeing it. They have to go back to the old stuff to see it. Hollywood is missing a gigantic opportunity by not bringing back family sitcoms. We need them, and I don't know who's going to make them, but I hope that some are in the works. I hope somebody sees this video. If you know somebody in Hollywood who wants to make this, share this video with them. Say, look at this idiot in his basement. He's got some ideas, I just want to see this. I want to see that sort of thing come back. I'd be willing to pitch this idea to anybody, really, but Like I said, it's not totally original, so it is what it is. But anyway, that's my thought on why family sitcoms need to come back. Why do you like? Do you like family sitcoms? If so, why? Do you think they need to come back? Do you have any ideas for what you would like to see if one comes back? Maybe you have a blueprint from an older episode of a TV show. Maybe you've got your own thoughts on that. Let me know what they are. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa with another Koopa Talks. I will see you guys next time. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.